Right then, let's get started. As we're fairly close to 2 anyway, and people can just join in as they do. So thank you very much for attending this demo today. My name's Jack, and I'm the field application scientist for the Osmolality range, so the OsmoTECH and clinical Osmo portfolio. And this presentation is really about running you through how to use the OsmoTECH and the OsmoTECH Pro, the OsmoTECH XT and the OsmoTECH Pro, and what features you can find on them, as well as a little bit of background information about the company. The initial presentation will take about 10-ish minutes, and then the rest it will be just solely on the instruments at that point. Feel free to ask any questions throughout the process. We are more than happy to pause the presentation while we do things. You'll notice a Q&A function at the top of the screen. If you could just pop in a little comment right now just to say that you can hear me, everything's okay. And as soon as I've got a bit of confidence that we can carry ahead. So please just let me know. Right, so yeah, as I said, please ask any questions throughout the process. My colleague Julian has kindly offered to read out any that come in, which I really appreciate, because obviously I can't, unfortunately, do 2 things at once. But with that said, let's get started. So for those of you that are familiar with Advanced Instruments, we obviously make osmometers, but we've been a leading developer of scientific and analytical equipment for around 65 years when we first got started with our Osmolality range. We also have a cell line development range and a liquid handler quality assurance range and pipette calibration service. And we've really been dedicated to increasing the productivity for you in a biopharm environment, as well as supporting food and beverage and clinical at the same time. Our main headquarters are in Norwood, Massachusetts, with our RTEL group based in Westbrook, Maine, and obviously we have another facility in Wimborne in the UK, which is where I currently am, using our media room. So any osmometers that you buy will come directly from Norwood, and we will ship it out to the relevant CAM/distributor, whoever needs to get it from there. As I say, with 65 years of experience in the industry, we have a lot of experience in developing and manufacturing analytical instruments, and we really try to give you the best possible service and support that we can. We have a fantastic technical support team that are always on hand should you have any queries, including myself. And we also have a dedicated networking department. So if you have any queries about any of the networking questions you have today, please just feel free to get in touch. Okay. So this is an overview of our total line that Advanced Instruments do. So we have our Osmolality range, being OsmoTECH for biopharm, Osmo for clinical. We have our cell line development series for seeding, imaging, that sort of thing, that are Celentim, and they are based out of Wimborne in the UK. We also supply bacterial cultivation kits known as Anoxamat, and one of our more recent acquisitions was RTEL, which are for your pipette and liquid handling system calibration and verification, which is a really, really useful system. So if you've got any need or any questions about some of these systems, I won't be the best person to answer them, but I can certainly put you in touch with people who can. So one of the key things that is probably a question, well, you should know where Osmolality is fitting in your workflow, but just in case you're not sure, we fit everywhere from upstream, downstream, formulation, fill, and we even have some food and beverage companies. We have some weird and wonderful applications too, like battery manufacturers that use our equipment. But just to give you an idea of how we actually fit into that workflow, we've got a few key applications that we see most often in the biotech industry. So in downstream, we have things like cell line development. So for cell line development, to produce your the appropriate yield of product that you're looking for, if you're looking to maintain a particular line of cells for a particular expression of a protein, it's really important that those cells stay happy throughout their entire life in situ. So what you can do is use Osmolality as part of a panel of measurements in order to make sure that the buffers or the media that you're using to grow these cells are of the optimal and appropriate composition to ensure that your cells survive and produce the maximum yield that you possibly can. And I say we have plenty of white papers, if any of you are interested, that we can give to you so you can read these for yourselves. In the downstream process, we obviously have things like buffer development being a really big market for a lot of companies right now. So it's unusual to see buffers made in-house unless they're particularly specialized. So we go to companies like GE, who are really well known for producing buffers. And as part of the quality control checks that must be done, they probably do Osmolality on their side. And when you get yours in, you purchase it into use for yourself, you want to make sure what you're buying is actually what you're getting. And Osmolality is a really important part of that key panel to make sure that everything that the manufacturer stated is as is in your particular lot number that you've purchased and that you're intending to use in your process. If it's not as intended to use, it could minimize the purity of what you're looking for. It could cause your cells or virus stability to be unoptimum, so you may find that cell death occurs quite early, and you might find that the overall yield of your product is just not as expected as it should be. So Osmolality is a really key part of that. For formulation fill, one of the most common things we see is vaccine development. So we've all had vaccines in the past where, I think particularly through COVID, where we've had a vaccine and afterwards we walk away and go, oh, well, that really, really hurt. And the main reason will probably be is the osmolality is over a certain threshold. So in order to minimize pain to patients and minimize discomfort to those who it is administered to, we aim to keep osmolality below 800 milliosmoles per kilogram, which is the way that osmolality is measured, as that seems to produce the least inflammation and the least pain at the injection site. As I said, COVID was a prime example of when things were rushed through because they had to be. It was a life and death situation. I know my second COVID vaccine was incredibly painful, and it's most likely because the osmolality wasn't quite below that threshold. But again, now that we're past that stage, it's a really important panel to make sure that the QC checks are being done on these vaccines that are being released to the market. And again, we have a wide variety of other applications. If you're interested, more than happy to have individual calls about it, or just send me an email. I'm more than happy to address any questions that you may have outside of this call. Okay. So with your osmometers and with any particular lab equipment in general, not just ours, you're going to be looking for several key metrics that make it an easy integration into your lab. First of which is you want it to be really easy to use, which our osmometers check that box. They're super easy to use. I always like to say if I can use them, anyone can. You want the performance to be consistent and reliable. You want your results to be repeatable. And again, our osmometers tick that bill in every stretch of the imagination. For those of you in upstream where your volume, your total volume available is quite low because you haven't quite gone through the process yet and you're trying to figure things out, you want to use as little volume as possible. And our osmometers fit that bill. So the OsmoTECH XT uses 20 microliters. The OsmoTECH PRO uses 30 microliters. So really, really minimal sample volumes. Testing time, you want to keep that down to a minimum so you're not inconveniencing anyone in your lab, but at the same time, you want it to be long enough that you're getting the correct results out of it. And the other two, data management and regulatory compliance, are ever increasing in the biotech industry. We have increasing number of calls coming into us about how do I integrate this with the LIMS system? How do I meet certain criteria? How do I make sure that I'm within pharmacopoeia guidelines? In fact, we had that in the call earlier today. And our osmometers are designed to help you fulfill those requirements. As regulatory compliance changes and evolves, we aim to evolve and change with it so that we always meet the regulatory compliance, so you don't have an issue with our equipment, so you can rely on what's coming out of that system as being compliant, and you don't have to worry about any extenuating circumstances through audits or anything like that. Okay, so as I said, our portfolio of microosmometers are industry leading in the way that, one, we are fully compliant with any sort of 21 CFR Part 11 that you may be adhering to, EU Annex 11, whatever part of the world you're in. Pharmacopoeias, we are compliant with every single one of them, so we aim to fulfill the needs of the specific markets. We aim to give you equipment that is reliable and that will give you superior performance over anything else. So, for example, our calibrations, unlike competitors that you may have to calibrate once a day or once every couple of hours, we calibrate once a year. We recommend you calibrate once a year, and we've seen no deviation in the results produced from our equipment. And the ability to measure varying and complex sample types through the range of our equipment. So if you're looking at testing things like monoclonal antibodies or high sugar solutions or cryopreservatives or anything like that that you wish to test, we have a range of equipment that can do it. So the XT is designed for those complicated samples. For those of you that want high throughput, we have the OsmoTECH PRO, where you can load up to 20 samples in one go and walk away while it does its testing. And we want it to be as easy as possible for the user to use. We want to give you complete security in knowing that the user that's using it can only do certain things as well, so they can't access certain menus. There are electronic signatures for results, so you can track exactly what's happened and when and who did it, which is a really big part of compliance moving forward. But again, anything that you could possibly need from a networking point of view or from a compliance point of view, we aim to meet that bill as best we can. So in order to compare the two, as we're going to go through them in person in a bit more detail, you have the OsmoTECH XT, which is our single sample microosmometer with an operating range of 0 to 4,000 milliosmoles per kilo. And that is achieved by doing two different ranges. We have a low range, which is 0 to 1,500 milliosmoles, and a high range, which is 1,500 to 4,000 milliosmoles. Now, don't be too worried about the fact that it's 1,500. It is not a hard cutoff. So there is a slight overlap between the ranges. So if you are slightly over that 1,500 threshold in the low range, you should still get a result without having to run the test all over again. So we give you that sort of flexibility in the machine. The test time can range between 150 seconds to 190 seconds in the high range and the low range. And that very much depends on the type of sample you have, the complexity of the sample, anything that may cause freezing to be more difficult. The OsmoTECH XT stands for extended testing. So that means that it can use something called intelligent freezing in order to actually wait for the appropriate freezing point of samples and waiting for what we call the plateau to be established correctly. But I'll describe more of that when we go on to the system. It's a single sampler instrument. So the sampler tip that you see onto the right hand side of the instrument with the yellow tag, you aspirate directly into a sample tip, introduce that into the system, and then off you go. You can start testing. And again, it's minimal volume required, so it's 20 microliter for your sample. The OsmoTECH PRO, on the other hand, is our multi-sample microosmometer, has an operating range between 0 to 2,000 milliosmoles, so still can test relatively complex samples, but this is more for your day-to-day testing that you have high throughput of, that you want to load up and walk away and be confident that you're going to get results in a certain amount of time. It only takes 90 seconds to produce a test result out of it. And instead of being a sampler tip, you actually use sample cups in this regard with a 30 microliter sample time. And as I said, you have the capacity to load up to 20 on your turntable and walk away and collect the results afterwards, or have them published to your LIMS system, whatever is easiest for you. And as I said, all of our OsmoTECH portfolio support the USP, EP, JP, CHP, and KP, so pharmacopoeia guidelines, as well as being adherent to whatever GMP practices you may need to do, and 21 CFR or EU Annex 11. So we really aim to give you as much regulatory compliance as we can in such small packages. Okay, just going to take a quick break so I can catch my breath a little bit, but has anyone got any questions before we move on to the actual instruments? Give you a minute or so just to have a think about it, just in case something hasn't sunk in. Okay. Okay, if there's no questions, then what I will do now, so my contact details are attached to this presentation. As I say, if you have anything you could possibly think of that you want to ask, even if you think it's a completely silly question, I can promise you I have asked those silly questions. Please feel free to get in touch. I'm more than happy to answer whatever questions you have. And if I don't know the answer, I know someone who will. And we'll work together to get you the answer that you need. Okay? Okay. So let me just swap my cameras over so I can go to the media room cameras, and then we'll actually get started with running some tests. Okay. Can everyone see my OsmoTECH XT?
We can, Jack, but it's very small.
That's fine. I will make that a spotlight for everyone. Lovely. So is that much bigger for everyone now?
It is.
Lovely. Okie dokie. So moving on to the OsmoTECH XT. As you can see here, I've already run some tests on the system because obviously we like to verify that our equipment works before doing demos. And by the sides, you'll see the range of consumables that we can supply with this instrument. So on the left-hand side, you have a series of reference solutions that can be used to represent certain osmolality values. These are very, very useful if you're trying to bracket samples to be compliant with pharmacopoeia, or you just wish to assess that the instrument is working in a particular range or a particular expected osmolality value. And these are available for purchase as part of a convenience kit or separately. We also supply convenience kits here, which are your consumables. So in this box, so just so I can make sure it's framed nicely, you'll see the nice box. Inside, you have a plunger wire for your sampler, and we recommend that you change this every 100 samples in order to make sure that your pipetting is accurate and the volumes going into the system are as accurate as possible. And inside of that box, you will find one of these consumable box holders. So these are clean room friendly. You can leave them in a clean room. They're easy to wipe down with ethanol, 2% bleach, whatever cleaning component you wish to use. Same with all the rest of the equipment. And on the bottom of the box, just so you're aware, you will notice a small RFID tag. That RFID tag enables us to track how many consumables you have actually used. So each XT box contains 100 sampler tips, so you can run up to 100 tests with one consumable box, which is we found to be a suitable number for particularly viscous samples or things that you require that extra testing functionality. You'll also notice it comes with not only the sampler tips, but we also have cleaning rods inside as well. So the cleaning rods are used to clean the chamber after every test to prevent any residue from building up inside the system. And we recommend that this is done after every single test and that you leave the cleaning rod in afterwards in order to indicate that it's clean and ready to use. Okay. And again, this is your sampler. Looks very much like a pipette, but is not a pipette. We call it a sampler. You'll notice on the end, it has one of our sampler tips. So if I just remove this just gently, you'll notice that it is actually a wire-based pipette with a Teflon tip for easy cleaning. And it's very easy to load the tip on. You just click it into place and that is ready to go. So now that I've gone through the nitty-gritty parts of it, whenever we run a test on our systems, we recommend that you reference it daily with what we call Clinitrol 290. So this is still a reference solution, but this reference solution is what is known as a clinically significant value. So it's applicable to clinical and biotech. And we like to run one of these tests at least once a day just to assess whether the instrument is functioning correctly, it's producing results in the correct range. And these do have specified confidence limits. So for a 290, you'd expect anywhere between 288 and 292 for it to be considered within one standard deviation and working correctly. So with your ampules, I'm sure you've all seen ampules before. What I like to do, we can supply ampule openers. So if you'd like one, please let us know and we can talk about getting you some. I like to wrap mine in tissue because I don't have one here. Break the ampule and throw the glass away. Now, to take the sample, very, very easy. You take your sample tip just like a normal pipette, push down, aspirate slowly. And in certain circumstances, you will get, if you can actually see that, a very, very small meniscus on top. That meniscus is not ideal for testing. So what we actually recommend, and we recommend you do with every single sample anyway, wipe around the outside of the tip with a Kim wipe or whatever laboratory wipes you have. Hold up your tissue and you simply wick it away. We don't like to dab on top of it because you could push a meniscus inside and that could affect the sample volume you're actually introducing. Remove your cleaner probe. Once it is removed, throw it away. Introduce your sample tip, push up the cradle, and it will try to begin a test. Now you'll notice I have something called sample IDs turned on. So what that means is I can input the name of the sample or scan a barcode. So because I'm lazy, I much prefer scanning barcodes. So we scan as so. As soon as it has that sample ID, it now begins the test. Okay. So has anyone got any questions about the testing procedure so far, just before I move on to a bit more about how our osmometers actually work?
There aren't any questions, Jack.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So our osmometers, all of our osmometers, are what are called freezing point depression osmometers. So what this means is we utilize supercooling and nucleation in order to produce an osmolality value. So currently the sample is undergoing supercooling. It's taken down to a temperature, a proprietary temperature. Once it hits that point, you will hear a solenoid or an impact hammer knocking, and you'll hear it knock twice. What at that point will happen is, much like if you were to take beer out of a freezer and bang it on the side of a table, it will start to crystallize. It's the process called nucleation. And that nucleation actually releases heat. So we're actually doing something called heat of fusion. So if you actually look at the front, this is the standard freezing point depression curve. So we're currently trying to get down to this point. It will then raise with the heat of fusion, and then we're waiting for what's called a temperature plateau to be established. That temperature plateau, when stable, will then be converted through algorithms in the machine to give you an osmolality measurement. So it's very, very easy and simple. The actual algorithm, I'm sure, is extremely complicated, but you do not need to know any of that because I don't know it. All you need to know is you put a sample in and you get an osmolality reading out of it. You just heard that solenoid knocking. That solenoid is initiating nucleation. Usually happens around 55 to 65%. And all we now have to do is wait for it to produce an osmolality result, which should be in the next couple of seconds. For those of you who operate in clean room environments who do not wish to take boxes of consumables in with you, perfectly understandable, we offer laminated cards with all of the barcode references you could possibly want, which are easy wipe and easy clean. Now, we can see that it's come out with a result of 291, which is perfectly within range. But what I want to demonstrate to you is we normally recommend that you clean it straight away, and that is the best practice. However, as labs are very busy, you won't always be around the instrument at times, so you may have walked away for a second. The instrument will let you know. It starts off by flashing, by telling you to please remove the sampler and clean the chamber. If you continue not to clean the chamber, it will beep audibly and it will beep incessantly at you until you do so. That is very much so we don't introduce anything onto the sample probe and keep it there for a prolonged period of time than is necessary. And as said, if you're using particularly viscous samples, you would want to make sure these are cleaned thoroughly and quickly. Any sort of residue on the probe could affect the results that you're producing. Now here is the incessant noise that I'm about to describe. It is beeping just constantly. As soon as you remove the sampler, the beeping stops. My advice is put the sampler down to start with. Take a cleaning rod. Pop the cleaning rod inside. Rotate it 10 times in one direction. And I apologize that the angle is a bit strange. This room is not the biggest. Take the cleaning rod out, and you will actually see a small, very small pinprick on the side of it. Rotate, push it back in, and rotate it 10 times in the opposite direction to ensure that you're optimally cleaning the sample probe. Okay, once it's clean, leave that in there. To remove the sample tip, so there are two methods of doing this. You can either treat it like a pipette and push down, and you'll see there was a little bit of drippage that came out. I don't personally like that method. Nothing wrong with it, it's just not my preference. What I like to do, so when you have it here, push your thumb against the side to just dislodge it, push it up, and remove. I prefer this method as it puts a little bit less strain on the plunger wire itself. But again, both are perfectly acceptable. Okay, once you've got it, give it a quick wipe with a Kim wipe or whatever you have. As it's Teflon, nothing will stick to it. But again, if you do wish to clean it with DI water, that is also perfectly fine. To put the new sample tip back on, push it over the top. You will feel a little bit of resistance from the plunger wire. That's normal. Push it down, and it will click into place, like so. When you're ready to have it test again, pop that into the side holder, and that now indicates that it is ready to go. Okay. Has anyone got any questions about that? Lovely. So again, please feel free to ask any questions throughout the process. We don't bite. We've all asked the same questions before. So what I'm going to do is just quickly zoom in to the OsmoTECH, so we've got a bit more of a better view. Let's say I'm not meaning it to be this dramatic. The camera is just incredibly slow. So now you can see the screen. Okay, so on the screen, you can see the Osmolality value was just produced, the time it was produced, as well as the date. You can see the sample ID name, which in our case is the barcode of our reference sample. And you'll see a variety of different other icons on the screen as well. Now, starting from the bottom, as I think this is probably the most useful for most of you, you will see a sample tip icon, which is actually the amount of remaining tests you have in that consumable box. An interesting question we got asked earlier was, oh, can I use every single sample tip in the box? Absolutely you can. There is no issue with that whatsoever. Just bear in mind, once you hit 0, you will not be able to run a test anymore. You must replace the consumable box. Okay. You'll also notice down here we have a LAN connection indicator. We have a small help guide, and we have an information button, which I'll go through in a second. You have a sample ID button, which means instead of introducing the sample and scanning the sample ID after you've introduced it, you can actually preload the sample ID and then introduce the sample. It is whichever way you think is most appropriate for you. We don't mind either way. We tend to introduce it first, then add the sample ID, because here at AI, when I'm testing things, I don't necessarily know what I'm testing. So I have to ask the customer after it's been introduced into the machine. However, if you do know, there is nothing wrong with queuing them up. And again, we'll go through the networking options, which makes this a bit more fancy and a bit more useful for those of you that are in more regulated environments. Okay, so down at the bottom, if we press on the orange circle, it will give you a bunch of key indicators that you may see on the system. So there are 4 tabs on this menu, starting from testing, going all the way to indicators. Since we're on indicators, we'll start there. So if you ever see an orange triangle pop up on the system, it means you've got an error. If you press on that orange triangle, it will give you a description of the error. And that could be something as simple as temperature out of range or something like that. Let's say your lab environment's really not stable. It will detect that, and then it will want you to sort of wait for everything to stabilize a little bit. But that being said, in the time I've been at AI, have never seen an error appear during a testing procedure. If you decide to turn on the review and approval function, which we'll go through later, you will have a pen with a scribbly line, which indicates that someone needs to come in and review the results before they are released from the system. And if you have a PDF icon down the bottom, that is the number of reports that are waiting to be released from the system, whether that be through a LIMS system or onto a USB stick, and they will queue up until the correct procedures are in place. So we also have access levels. As part of 21 CFR, we have to provide at least 3 user access levels: admin, supervisor, and operator, all with different roles and all with different restrictions. Administrators have a red key on menu items they can access and only access, so they have overarching access to everything. Gold keys mean supervisors and admins, as again, because admins have access to everything, they naturally have access to supervisor and operator levels. But gold means a supervisor and admin can access those menu items, and white means an operator can access those menu items. If it's gold and white, it means everyone can. Okay, and you'll see those more in the menu as we go through it. For your LAN and list connections, it gives you a description of what you might see. So for LAN, you've either got green for connected or grey for disconnected. Fairly self-explanatory. If you have a laboratory information system or a LIMS system, however you call it in your respective areas, you will have grey with a little N on the inside of it if it's disabled, red if it's enabled but disconnected, and green if it's enabled and connected. That little N means the number of results that are waiting to be sent off to your LIMS system. So if you lose connection halfway through, you basically have an idea of how many are pending for release. And as internet connections and LAN connections aren't always the most stable, it's a good idea to have an indication of what you've actually got left on the system for it to be released. Okay. And finally, we have the testing side, which is the consumables indicator, which I showed you before. The consumables indicator, if it's white, it means you have above 20. If it's yellow, it means you have less than 20 tests remaining, and is a good idea to find a new box or purchase a new box before you run out. You do not have to get rid of a box once it hits yellow. You can use every single sample tip in there. We just request that you have another one handy to continue testing. Otherwise, you might have to have a frantic phone call with us to try and get you a box in time. So it just gives you an idea of when to be aware that you might need to replace your consumables. Okay. So the green eye at the bottom is information for you and information that we may find useful if we get in contact with you. So you have a system history. So you have everything from when it was last calibrated, and I calibrated. So I didn't calibrate, I calibrated the other one, but when it was last calibrated, obviously this being a demo instrument, it sits not being used for quite a long time. But again, the calibrations, we do recommend you do it once a year, but obviously because this one gets stored and not used, it doesn't always get what it needs. The last PM it had, which was yesterday, installation date, the temperature, the probe lot numbers that you might have. So if you're having an issue with a sample probe, the current operating range that you're in, the number of tests you've done, every possible bit of information in there is useful to someone. Okay. The LAN connection, this will give you what it's connected to, the MAC address of the instrument, any relevant IP addresses or anything that IT may have programmed. You'll be able to get an overview of it from this screen. Okay. Revisions refers to software and firmware. So if you ever have to call our technical support desk, they may ask you for some of this information. And it's really easy to give them a quick overview without having to send an export if this is what they need, but usually they'll ask you for an export of the database. If you have purchased through a distributor, your distributor information will be on the system in the local distributor tab. If you purchase direct from us, obviously it will say our name, but it just so you have the details of who you need to contact should you have an issue in any event. And of course, because it's an Advanced Instruments piece of kit, we like to put our logo in there as well, so you know exactly who you bought from and where we're based. But again, this is all useful information for you should you need any information. I apologise for the camera shaking. Someone apparently has just jumped on the floor above me. And that's that one. So there are a few other useful pieces of information on this too. You have the low and high range, so you're able to switch between the two. If you were to test a sample in the low range, but it is actually out of range, so it's too high to be read, you will get an error that will say sample out of range. And that means you need to change to the other range in order to produce a result. And that will happen in either range depending on what you're testing. And it's a really useful indication of saying, so let's say you had an expected osmolality 1400, but it's actually 2200. This gives you an indication to say, try the other range, see what happens. And then you'll usually get a good idea of what your osmolality actually is. Okay? So you are able to log into the system. Currently, I have it turned off that you have to log into the system to perform tests, but you can turn this on. But you can log in as a specific user to perform tests. And as I said, if you have multiple users in the lab and you want to keep track of who's testing what and the results that are being produced, you'll be able to notice if there's a real discrepancy in the testing that's happening. And it means you could then tell that user to undergo more training, or you can just keep an eye on how your system is actually running. Okay. One of the most useful features, so if you're not setting any of this from a network point of view, but you want to give your instrument a name, which sounds like a really minor thing, but a lot of labs love it. If you press and hold onto this tab, where the instrument name actually is, it'll ask you to log in, but you can actually give your instrument a unique name, which is really useful if you're trying to refer to it for, say, like maintenance services, or you want it to be the serial number of an instrument, or you're just one of those labs that likes to call their instruments names. There is nothing wrong with that. We do not judge. The more personality you give the instruments, the better. So it's completely there for you if you want to set it, and you can also set it through the network if needs be. Okay. So now that we've gone through the main menu, the only other thing I'll point out is you'll see a yellow banner across the top of the instrument that says IDs required. This is a function I have turned on, that it requires to have a sample ID in order to run a test. You can also turn this off if needs be, if your regulatory compliances aren't that strict, or if it's just not part of your workflow. So you have complete flexibility to change this. Okay, this little hamburger icon, I like to call it, if you press on that, it will give you a series of other menus. Calibration menu, you are welcome to calibrate it yourself if you wish. However, we don't recommend you do it more than once a year. If you have specific SOPs and you are in an environment where you have to calibrate more frequently than once a year, we don't recommend you calibrate more than once a quarter. And that's coming from our guidance. But again, you are more than welcome to calibrate this yourself. Conversely, on a PM, if the result's looking out of range and you've got a service contract with us, we will calibrate it for you. Okay, so if you go into the results tab first, because this is probably the one that most people are interested in. I've run a fair few samples through this today, so we've got a few active samples we can look at. So you'll see a variety of options down the bottom of the screen, but let's not worry about that too much now. You'll see sample IDs, osmolality results produced in milliosmoles, the date and time it was run, the user ID if you've got it turned on that was run, and a description if you require a comment. So this could be something like pending approval, or if the sample failed, you can put a comment in to say did not freeze because. So you've got that flexibility in there too. So if I were to click on a sample, you get the LIS function, which means if you press that, it will then try and push it to an LIS system. Obviously, I don't have one connected, so that's not really a viable option for me. Conversely, you can automate the publishing of results. But if you just wanted to push one specific result or a couple that you found, that is more than fine. You can do that way. You can also export the result, and this can either be to a USB or to a network folder, depending on what you'd like to use. A lot of pharma labs now aren't allowed to use USB sticks for a variety of reasons. So if you wish to just keep things solely on the network or solely on the instrument, then that is perfectly fine. You can buy a standalone printer to go with this system, which is a dot matrix printer. So if you wish to also have paper copies that the ink never fades, we can supply this to you as well, but this is an optional extra and is only if you really need that. Okay, so you can either press on one, you can press multiple samples, or you can press and hold and drag in order to select a few. I recommend using a pen with a stylus on it, which is quite useful. Conversely, you can plug a keyboard and a mouse into it just to make it easier. Down the bottom, you will see a statistics function, and what that will do is it will give me the mean, the standard deviation, and the CV values of the samples I've selected. All of these samples have been run over the past 2 days, and these are the 290s, and it's come up with a CV of 0.17, which is very, very good. It's more than acceptable in, I would like to think, all lab environments. But again, you can do this based on your own specific internal requirements. Okay. So once you're on this menu, if you wish to get rid of samples or you wish to get rid of a series of samples, you can either press them one by one, which I think we can all agree would be a little bit tedious if you've got more than two, or you can press this icon up here and it will clear the screen for you. Conversely, you can also just exit the results tab and it will just clear that for you too. Results cannot be deleted from the system as part of 21 CFR Part 11 guidelines. However, you can export them to look at as a CSV file or analyze in your own particular statistical formats. Okay. So if you go into the settings tab, there are a variety of different menus in here, such as date and time, language, users. So date and time is a useful one. You can set this to be from a network time, or you can set it on the instrument yourself. Language, that one's fairly self-explanatory. You can select the language of your choice. The users tab, this is where you can actually track all of the users that are currently on the system. So for those of you that are interested, the default admin password on the XT is password1 with no lowercase, no uppercase. Again, when you have your own usernames and passwords, please feel free to set them to whatever complexity you like. But for our demo units, we find this more than sufficient as we're not dealing with anything proprietary. You can add users, you can edit them, you can select them, disable them. You can also do something called LDAP, which is a way of interfacing with your Active Directory protocols, which means you can use your Windows credentials to log into the system. So this can either be through scanning an ID barcode that's linked to your corporate account, or whatever way you choose to use it. If you decide to use LDAP, there is no need to control the users from the system. Your IT protocols will control it for you. And in a lot of ways, a lot of companies prefer that because then the IT has total control over what's happening. Okay. But again, if you've got more questions about LDAP, please feel free to reach out. We can put you in touch with our networking team, or I can give you a brief description of it in a bit more detail than we're going through today. Okay. So if I were to edit it, I could set a password for it. I could set the access levels. And that's pretty much all you can do from the user point of view, because it's just basic functions that you just want to give it a specific role with a specific right. And that's it. Okay. So if we exit off that tab, a lot of these menus will not be useful to you. These are more engineerings for an engineer to use. The controls tab is where you can register your own lot number of controls. So for instance, our reference solutions, and register the correct standard deviations that you wish to use, the expiry date, so it will flag if you're using an out-of-date expiry. Really useful. We don't see a lot of people using it, but it is becoming more common. The networking tab. So for those of you that are IT savvy or work in an IT department or are responsible for trying to network some of your machines, we'll spend a quick moment just going over it. So you have everything you need to configure your LAN devices, whether it's a dynamic host or whether it's a static IP, as well as you can give it a specific host name so it's easy to find on your network. We institute what's called OPC UA on the systems. So this gives you full bidirectional control over the instruments if you wish to use it. So this means not only can you monitor the instruments from a remote server to make sure what's happening on the system is correct and the people who's logged in, what tests have been run, but you can also send commands to the system. So a really useful case is pushing sample IDs towards it. So you can push a list of sample IDs which restrict the user from inputting it themselves, and they have to follow that specific criteria and only load that one sample at a time. Another is if you suspect the machine is being used improperly, and we hope not, but there are multiple scenarios in the lab where it could happen, you could lock the instrument down to prevent anyone from using it, which is really useful if you're suspecting there's an issue. Okay. We have the web server. So there is a remote web server that you can use to monitor the results that are being produced from your system. You cannot edit or you cannot approve results from that web server. It is purely for you to look at, and is more for if you have multiple OsmoTECH instruments, you can monitor all of them on the same web server and you can see what results are being produced. So it gives you a good overarching view. Say you're a supervisor who sits in the office and you just want to keep an eye on what your lab staff is producing, then that's a really good way of doing it. And last but not least, LIS system or LIMS in a few other places, you can control every setting that's needed for a LIMS system. If you're not sure how to get it integrated with your LIMS system, or your IT department isn't quite sure, please let them reach out to us and we'll more than happily help them. It's in our interest to help you, and we really do want to help. And our networking team in the US is brilliant. Anything I don't know, which is a lot, they will know everything about what you're trying to do. And if they don't, they will go away and learn it and they will help you succeed. And that's what we're there for. Okay. So coming out of that, one of the really useful parts on this is the restrictions tab. So the restrictions tab is really key for 21 CFR and for any sort of regulatory compliance. This is where you actually set what users can do what tasks they can carry out, and who, like whether the passwords are reset and anything like that. So there are a variety of options that you can restrict from supervisors and operators. If you wanted to be really mean, you could restrict everything apart from running a test. However, it's completely down to your internal procedures. And as I said, if you're using LDAP and things like that, you may be able to set restrictions from your own IT protocols. But that being said, if you really want to lock down what specific user can do what, this is the way to do it. Okay, and there are a variety of options on there. Passwords, if you're deciding not to use LDAP, you can set expiry dates. Pre-expire passwords on creation means as an admin, I could create a user account with a password. The first time that user logs in, the password will be reset and they will have to pick their own password that fits within the password strength criteria that we set. So it means that I no longer know the password. There are no chances of me running a test as that person, which is really important for compliance. And allowing deletion of users, again, if you're going through LDAP, this is not necessary. But if you do want to be able to delete users, let's say you have someone leave the company, you can turn that on in this setting. We do require that you have one admin account on the system, at least. Please do not delete your last admin account, because then you'll have to get in touch with us and we will have to reset that for you. More than happy to do so, but just wanted to give you a heads up. Please don't delete your only admin account. And for testing, so in some labs, administrators are IT only, as they are the ones doing the networking. So you may want to restrict them from doing any testing, at which point you could turn off the ability for admins to perform testing, which is really useful. You could also require a user ID, so someone to log in to perform a test, as well as a sample ID, which I already have. As well as if you want someone to have to log in to change the range of a system. So if you're expecting certain osmolality values and then someone changes the range to get a result, you can then sort of require a login. You can track who's done it and go, well, why have you done this? Okay, and they will probably have a reasonable explanation. Audit trails, so you can require review and approval of results. So for those of you that are in particularly GMP environments, this is very, very useful, especially requiring comments and e-signatures. But you can also restrict who's allowed to put a comment on the results. So you can have it to supervisors only if needs be. If you want everything on this system to be locked down and reported, you can record all of your logins and logouts in the audit trail, as well as requiring a reason for any changes in the settings at all, which again, for compliance, it may seem overkill, is a very big part. And because we're all trying to head to that eco-friendly lab of the future, you can set the screen dimming time on the system. So you can either have it never turn off if you're really hell-bent on burning fossil fuels, or you can set the screen dimming time to 5 minutes because you don't want it to be active the entire time. This is really useful if you're not using the system all the time, but you can also just turn the system off. It will not affect the calibration status, and then turn it on as you need to use it. Okay. And again, for automatic logout time, for security, you do not want a user to stay logged in for the entire period of time if they have walked away from the machine. Okay. And again, you have a variety of ways of doing your data management too. So you can decide whether you want a CSV file or a PDF format, whether it's being exported to a network folder, or if it's being exported, if backups are going to a network folder. All that is controlled under data management and is only accessible by admins. Okay. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to let me know. A lot of the tabs on this screen aren't particularly useful to you, as they will be more for engineers. But one that I do want to point out is the Events tab. So the Events tab is your audit trail. So this shows you every setting that's been changed, who did it, what tests have been run, if you turn that setting on, if I've changed the date and time recently. So everything in here can not only be exported and sent to us if we need to review something, but it can be exported to your own systems, so you've got a record of everything that's happened. Again, you cannot delete or edit anything in an audit trail. You can only determine what events are put into the audit trail through your settings, but nothing can be deleted and nothing can be changed. Same with the results tab. You can export just like the results to a CSV file if you wish. This will be exported as a .db file, and we have specific software that you can read that with. But most of the times you'll do this will be to send it to us so we can review if there are any issues with your system. And that's pretty much it for the settings on the XT. Is everyone happy with that? Does that make sense to everyone? I say, if you've got a question, please feel free to let me know, and then we'll quickly run over to the Pro to run a test, which we have to spend a lot less time on. But yeah, as I said, please just let me know if there's anything else you need to know about that. So, moving over to the Pro, or the Tech Pro, rather. So again, this is our 20 sample micro osmometer, which you can do a number of tests with. On this system, we provide you with an MLA pipette. However, if you wish to use your own pipettes that you have in-house that have been calibrated, please feel free. We provide you with wiper rings in the consumables, as these will be needed to clean the probe after every test. And again, one of these for every 20 tests. Reference solutions as before. Sample cups, so they come in packs of 500. And inside that pack, you will have what's called a test card. So the test card is what registers the consumables to the instrument. That test card goes inside the instrument there. And then once that's in, it will register the new consumable box. Once that's done, you may throw the sample card away. It does not have to remain in the system. Some people like to keep it in the system just because. However, please do not throw that sample card away before running the tests, as you will not be able to register your consumables, and then that means you will have to get in touch with us. Again, more than happy to help, but we do not want to put you in a position where you can't use your system for whatever reason. So let's just zoom in on the screen a little bit. So you'll notice it has 20 positions. I've already installed the wiper ring. It also has an evaporation cover to prevent any evaporation while the samples are sitting here. So once you load the turntable, we can get it to register to see if there's any tubes. On the first install, it will scan for any tubes that may be present on the system. So you can preload your turntables if you wish, and then just scan the sample IDs afterwards. Or you can do what I'm about to do and load one at a time. Okay. So the tube scanner is just detecting to make sure there's anything at all that's on the table. And now it hasn't found anything, but it knows I want to run a test. So it's asking me for the sample ID. Again, you can turn this off. I just prefer to have it on because I like to keep a track of what I'm testing. Much like before, you still have a barcode scanner mounted to the front, which is incredibly useful. This time, instead of it being horizontal, it is vertical. They're incredibly useful barcode scanners. They can read 2D barcodes and anything that you may want to put in front of it. Because it's angled downwards, it's relatively easy to get things to scan. He says. There we go. It's my fault for holding the box the wrong way. So that has now registered what sample I'm trying to run, which is again a 290. I will then take a pipette, aspirate some of my 290, and then inside one of these sample cups, we recommend you pipette to the bottom of the sample cup, like so. Pop that in there, and then press the green play button to run it. If you want to load another sample, you'd press the turntable icon. If you want to cancel, you'd press the green X. If you start a test and cancel it, it will be recorded in the audit trail. It's a question we got this morning. And you can then go and ask the user for reasons why. You can put comments on it, anything like that. Okay. And again, because we provide you with an MLA pipette, you are more than welcome to use it. However, do not feel like you have to. If you have 30 microliter pipettes sitting there or adjustable pipettes, you are more than welcome to use your own in-house. The XT, you have to use the sampler and the sample tips that come with it. Much like the XT, it still has a sample indicator, so we currently have 220 cups left. So if I were to introduce a new test card, that would be reset to 500. Okay. It's going through the same process as before. It is supercooling the sample. The solenoid knock is slightly different on this one. So the solenoid knock on this will knock a couple of times in slow succession and then several times in quick succession. It's just a slightly different way that the impact hammer works on this. It will still produce the exact same, it's the same methodology of producing Osmolality as the XT, just without the intelligent freezing technology. And again, a range of 0 to 2000. I recently calibrated this about an hour ago, so it should be pretty accurate. And at around 65%, you should hear the impact hammer knock, like so. That will then wait to produce a result, which is, and again, around 90 seconds, if not a little bit quicker for simpler samples. And we're expecting around 290. So 291, still perfectly acceptable within range. Now what will happen is, as you can see, the sample probe's moved up. The turntable will move slightly. The sample probe will then pierce through the wiper ring in order to clean it correctly. Okay, if you're using particularly viscous samples or sticky samples, you may need to clean the sample probe after use with a bit of DI water on a little cotton swab that we also provide just to give it a thorough clean or as part of your weekly maintenance. What's really important to know is that sample can stay on the system, providing that it's not dangerous to anyone, and you can just continuously keep loading throughout the day. Please bear in mind, if you remove the turntable, like I'll show you in a second, that wiper ring is then done. It will not remember where it has pierced through in the wiper ring once you remove the turntable. If you leave the turntable in situ, it will know that it's already used position 1 and the wiper ring for position 1, and then we'll carry on. Okay, so if you're only doing 1 or 2 or 3 samples at a time, it may be worth waiting so you're not having to go through multiple wiper rings. If you're doing 12 to 15 samples at a time, then I wouldn't worry about it too much. You can unscrew the turntable by this little knob here, pull up and remove, and you'll now see the screen will be wiped out. You can then get rid of any sample tubes that you might have. And then to install it, likewise, you have to get down and look at it just a little bit to line up the prongs, like so. There we go. And then tighten it back up. And that's all there is to it. So the menus are very, very similar for all compliance settings, are exactly the same for both instruments. The only real differences you have is you have a few other tests in the diagnostic screen for things like motor tests and the test card tests and things like that. Okay. Has anyone got any questions? That's pretty much the overview of both of the instruments. So we're pretty much set as for that. So now we've got a little bit of time. I appreciate that we're quite close to 3 o'clock. However, if you've got any questions, please feel free to drop them in now. I am more than happy to answer any questions you've got. Alternatively, you are more than welcome to email me any questions. So we've got one. Once a barcode for a user login has been registered, can we change the barcode in the future if this gets updated? That would be down to your IT system. So I'm assuming you would be making barcodes in-house. So you would probably, providing it produces the same data for the user logins, and it's pushed from your IT system, it shouldn't be a problem. However, if you're producing barcodes in-house, yes, you can change them. You just need to make sure the information produced is the same so you can log in successfully. Does that answer your question, Ella? I think on the OsmoTECH XT, it's the same for both instruments. So they both use the same login criteria. Perfect. Has anyone else got any questions? Okay. If no one has any questions, I'm more than happy to end this here. As I said, if you do have any questions that you think of after the meeting, I know I'm terrible for that. Please feel free to get in touch. And either I or a colleague will answer for you, and we'll be more than happy to help and walk you through it if needs be. Okay. Okay. I think we can end that there then. Thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you all again in the near future, whether in person or on one of these webinars. If you really like the webinar and you'd like this to be more frequent, please let us know, and that's something we can have a look at arranging. Alternatively, if there's any specific topics you'd like to be covered in the future, please just let us know. You're more than welcome. Thank you very much for attending, everyone.